Not all workplace hazards can be fully controlled or eliminated. When hazards in the work environment cannot be engineered out, or when guards, shields and other safety devices have limited effectiveness, there will often be a need to wear personal protective equipment. It is important to realise that personal protective equipment is not a substitute for hazard control, but the last safety option to be implemented after all other practical safety measures have been considered and applied. Personal protective equipment, therefore, is rarely used in isolation and is often incorporated into safety procedures as added protection should an accident occur. Personal protective equipment is used in a wide variety of applications, but can be grouped broadly under the following headings: head protection, hearing protection, eye and face protection, respiratory protection, hand and arm protection, foot and leg protection, skin protection, trunk and abdomen protection, and finally, whole body protection. As well as the widely used and well-accepted items such as protective helmets, safety glasses, earplugs, respirators, gloves and safety footwear, there are numerous other items that have a place in personal protection. Here are just some examples. Reflective clothing, protective aprons and waistcoats, body belts, safety harnesses, instep protectors, knee pads, oversleeves, specialised goggles, barrier creams, sunscreens, and so on. In this program, we are going to examine personal protective equipment by looking at the 5 major groups involved. Vision is something most of us take for granted. Rarely do we stop and think what it would be like if we lost our eyesight. This lack of appreciation often leads to complacency, which sees us taking unnecessary risks that could damage our eyes. The fact is that the majority of eye injuries which occur in the workplace could have been prevented. In order to protect people from eye hazards, it is important to select appropriate eye or face protection according to the activities being performed and their associated hazards. As well as offering protection from serious eye injuries that could lead to permanent blindness, eye and face protection is used to help prevent flash burns to the eyes from welding equipment, burns to the eyes and face from hot or molten metals, pterygiums caused by excessive exposure from the sun and dust, partial loss of vision caused by embedded objects, impact and penetrating eye injuries, chemical burns and steam burns to the eyes and face, light burns from laser equipment, general protection from cuts and scratches, and even with some face shields, protection from extremes of temperature. Eye protectors and/or face shields should be worn whenever a person is required to enter or work in an area where eye hazards are present. These areas should be designated and have appropriate signs indicating the need to wear protection, but unfortunately this is not always the case. Protection should be worn in areas containing hazardous materials such as chemicals, solvents, gases, fumes, dust and mists, and hazardous processes like drilling, welding, chipping, hammering, cutting, grinding, sawing and spraying. The most imperative aspect with eye and face protection is that you must have a good fit. Safety glasses should rest comfortably on your nose and snug enough not to keep slipping down when you bend over. Safety goggles need to be fitted tight enough to obtain a seal around the rim of the goggles. This is critical when working with impact hazards and splashing chemicals. Face shields of the adjustable headband type obviously need to be adjusted for each individual. Other attachments must be suitable for the make and type of the shield. In the workplace, there are three widely used types of head protection: caps and hairnets, industrial scalp protectors, often referred to as bump caps, and industrial safety helmets. Caps and hairnets are worn to protect against scalping and entanglement. Bump caps can also offer protection from striking fixed objects. Safety helmets or hard hats not only offer protection from striking fixed objects, but protect from falling objects. Caps and hairnets are worn whenever there is a danger of the hair becoming caught in moving equipment, or if required for purposes of hygiene. Helmets should be worn in any situation where there is the possibility of falling objects. Because helmets also provide general protection to the head, many industrial plants and sites have policies of wearing hard hats at all times at these locations. The most important considerations here are to select the most appropriate design. For example, a helmet with a short peak will allow better upward vision. Make sure the equipment is in good condition. For example, it has not been modified or left in direct sunlight for extended periods. And finally, make sure it fits properly. Airborne contaminants such as dusts, fumes, mists, gases and fibres are some of the most common hazards found in the workplace today. In many cases, in order to protect people from the harmful effects of these hazards, it is necessary to choose and wear appropriate respiratory protection. Respirators range from self-contained breathing apparatus to airline types, through to the much more widely used air purifying types. Both the self-contained breathing and airline types should only be used by properly trained personnel. However, the air purifying types are used by a wide variety of people. There are two types of air purifying respirators: the disposable mask type, such as these, and the non-disposable type, which can be fitted with a range of different filters and cartridges for different applications. Although respirators are sometimes used when dealing with non-toxic but unpleasant smells and odours, the main reason for their use is far more important. Respirators are principally worn to protect against hazardous airborne contaminants and to help prevent their absorption into the body through the respiratory system. Respiratory protection is worn when it is designated for the job task or the work area. Commonly, this will be when the type and concentration of the contaminants are known, such as when spraying. There are, however, two other circumstances when respiratory protection may be required: when conducting investigations or corrections and in emergency situations. In both of these situations, types and levels of concentrations of contaminants may be unknown, and careful selection of the appropriate respiratory protection equipment is very important. If unsure, check with your supervisor. It is critical to wear respiratory protection correctly so that it provides the protection it was designed to give. One fundamental rule that applies to all males is that the wearer must be clean-shaven. In some cases, even a few hours' growth can considerably reduce the effectiveness of the seal, and it is pointless wearing respiratory protection if you don't have a good seal. Before beginning any work period with a respirator, the following procedure should be carried out. Check that the mask is clean and hygienic. Check that there are no cracks or damage to the body of the mask. Carefully examine the outer rim for damage. Any damage here could prevent an adequate seal. Check that the inhalation and exhalation valves are functional and clean. Where applicable, ensure the visor is clean and does not have scratches that will restrict or obscure vision. If applicable, check that the speaking diaphragm is fitted correctly. Check that the filter or cartridge being used is the correct one for the job and it is not past its expiry date. And finally, that the filter or cartridge is correctly seated in the retainer and the retainer is tightened in position. So, having checked the mask, how should it be fitted? Although different types and makes of respirators will require different techniques, the principles should be as follows. Ensure that straps are loosened. Bend forward and hang the mask over your face. Then evenly pull up and out on the bottom straps so that the mask cups nicely into the chin. Next, evenly tighten the middle straps and finally the top straps. The straps should appear like this, evenly positioned around the head. Now fitted, it is important to conduct a leakage or fit test. There are a number of acceptable fit tests that can be used. The negative fit test is one that is commonly used. Unscrew the filters or cartridges from the mask body. Hold your palms firmly over the inhalation connectors and breathe in and hold your breath for about 5 seconds. You should feel the mask collapse slightly on your face. If you have a leak, you should be able to feel air coming in through the mask somewhere, or if it is a particularly bad fit, you may hear it hissing. If you have any leak, try to refit the mask. If it reoccurs, you will need to use a mask with different contours, which will enable a good seal. Never use a mask that does not give a proper seal. You will not be protected. Noise-induced hearing loss is a major concern in the industrial workplace. It usually develops gradually over a long period of time when people are exposed to high noise levels. It can also result from sudden loud noises such as explosions or from loud impacts. Unfortunately, many people are unaware of a gradual hearing loss and discover the problem too late when irreparable damage has already been done. Personal hearing protection comes in two forms: earplugs and ear muffs. There are numerous types and brands offering not only different levels of protection, but choices for individual comfort. Frequently, hearing protection is worn because engineering controls have not been effective in reducing general noise to an acceptable level. Also, hearing protection is worn as a precaution in situations where noise levels may vary or there is the possibility of loud sudden noises. Finally, when using particular pieces of equipment or tools, such as a nail gun where there is a known noise hazard. Hearing protection should be worn whenever a person is required to enter or work in an area where noise levels can cause hearing damage. Hearing protection should also be worn whenever a designated area is signposted. Remember, in operating plants, noise levels can vary significantly depending upon what job functions are being carried out. Hearing protection will not function properly if it is not worn correctly and have the appropriate attenuation. Having first checked that the plug is appropriate and hygienic, it should be fitted like this. Roll the plug between thumb and forefinger to approximately this size. Pull the ear out and back and insert it into the ear and ear canal. With earmuffs, ensure they are clean, comfortable and they provide a good seal. Also make sure, if they are worn with other protection, they are of the type which will not interfere with their fit. In our final category of protective clothing, we are going to include not only apparel, but also gloves and footwear. Broadly speaking, protective clothing affords protection from thermal and chemical burns, contact with hazardous substances and items, protection from hot and cold atmospheric conditions, and in some instances increases visibility. Safety footwear can help prevent crushing and impact injuries, puncture wounds, electrical shock and chemical burns or poisoning. Gloves can help in the prevention of abrasions and cuts, burns, infection, dermatitis, and injuries associated with extremes of temperature. As with all forms of personal protective equipment, protective clothing should be worn whenever one of the following conditions apply. Whenever it is specified in a safe working procedure in your workplace. Whenever you enter an area that has been signposted. And finally, whenever you are performing a task where you believe that protective clothing is necessary. Regardless of the item of personal protective equipment required, there are 4 basic rules that must be adhered to. It must be suited specifically to the task. It must be inspected prior to use. It must be worn correctly, and it must fit properly. Failure to apply these rules can often lead to ineffective protection. With recent advances in technology, many improvements have been made in both the design and the level of protection offered by many types of personal protective equipment. Add to this an ever-increasing range of products and, in many cases, far greater levels of comfort, and it is difficult to understand why the wearing of appropriate personal protective equipment is often ignored. Many items of personal protective equipment have become widely accepted over recent years. Seatbelts, hard hats, and even sunscreen are just 3 examples. Long and short-term illness, major and minor injuries, poisoning, burns, electric shock, and so on, can all be prevented at times with the use of appropriate personal protective equipment. If you have a need to wear protective equipment, make it part of your routine. Check its suitability, its condition, and wear it.